Hi, this is Jeremy and welcome back to Blender for Designers. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial based on the new project I'm doing, which is mockup3d.com. And I'm using something called Blend4Web. Let me show you. And as it sounds, as the word implies, it's a way to go from Blender to the web, a way to take your Blender files and bring them online. Let me see if I can show you. This is an export I made of a Blender file. Specifically, you guys might recognize that this is the box that I did in the very first tutorial I did, which I will link down below. So, and this is in a website online. It's just a file right now, but you can put it anywhere you would like if you want to share this with friends or clients or whoever. And it can be more complicated than just a box, but this is a nice example. So the way to do it is I have the original tutorial here from the very first episode, and I'm going to show you how to take it in Blender and make it on the web. So let's open it up in Blender. So your Blender open, and let me get my face out of the way so we can see what we're doing. And this is the original file, as you can see, still in cycles. So the first thing you have to do is install Blend4Web. I'm not going to go over this in heavy detail because it's kind of boring and I've already installed it. But basically you have to go to the downloads and you download a whole zip file. They have several versions. They have the CE version, the Pro version you have to pay for. I've honestly actually got the Pro version and have barely, I don't think I've actually used any of the Pro features. So it's actually free to download the CE, which is the free version. And you get like a zip file, and then you follow their instructions. They're not too bad. And you go and you install it, and you gotta unpack the zip file. It's very important. That folder actually is very important. We'll get to that in a minute. But then you go into Preferences, and you have to go to File, and there's a little place where you can put right here, actually, under Scripts. You put their folder there once you've unzipped it. And then you got to go into Add-ons and install it, which I think is, yeah, Blend4Web. Again, I'm not going to go over the details, but what happens when that happens, you should have, in addition to Cycles Render, Blender Render, and Blender Game, is a new thing called Blend4Web. So let's switch to that. And actually, there's another new thing. We're going to have a new export as well, Blend4Web JSON and Blend4Web HTML. But as we switch to Blend4Web, you're going to notice something kind of weird, is that this has become kind of blank. There's nothing. All the materials have been lost because they're cycles materials, and this is the cycles material right here. We're gonna have to change the material. That's the big thing we have to change. So I'm gonna go, first of all, I'm gonna show you actually how this works. One really nice thing is there's a button here called Fast Preview, which tells you exactly what you get in Blend4Web right now. So it's like a render button, but it works almost instantly. So you do it, and it pops up in Chrome, which is my default browser, and this is the scene. Now, there are no lights, and there are 3 objects. As you can see, there's the box itself, there's the ground plane, and then as I zoom out a little bit, you can see this plane, which was used to light. That was used as a light. There was an emission shader put on there. So I'm going to close this. We're going to want to put these materials on there. So let's do that. First of all, let's save this. Blend4Web unfortunately relies on or uses a very similar material system to the Blender internal render. And I've honestly barely used the Blender internal render, and for good reason. It kind of sucks. Not because of the render, but because of the user interface, which is not good. So but we can go do that. Let's get rid of this material already on box, and let's add a new one here. And we'll call this like box. B4W. All right, and then we're gonna just get rid of this plane. Actually, we're not gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna show you something. I'm gonna move this to another layer, but I'm gonna show you in Blend4Web that even though I moved it to another layer, it still shows up. So how to get rid of those, and everything's gonna show up in Blend4Web whether it's on a layer or not. So to get rid of it, you have to go to the object, or the object section, and then you got to go down here and go to Do Not Export. And so we'll just get rid of that for now. and now it shouldn't export. And we could delete it too. We don't actually need it, but I just wanted to show you that the objects, everything's going to export. Everything in your Blender file is going to export. That is not, basically it's not, that you don't tell it not to. So, and you can see we still don't have the material. So we're gonna need a light of some sort. Let's go and add, let's go here and let's go add a light. I'm gonna use something called a hemi lamp. The lamps, the regular, having planes with emission shaders doesn't work in Blend4Web, but having just regular old lights do. So I'm gonna rotate this mostly in X, kind of a slight overhead, and then rotate that over here. I'm going to do like a double light look. And there we go. So I got 2 lamps on this thing. And so we should have, let's take a look at that. So there we go. So we have this lit, so we should actually start to see something, which is good. We do in fact see something. It's not exactly what we want, but we can start to build from there. And then let's create a lamp for the floor here as well, or a material, sorry, for the floor here as well. Let's call this, let's create a new one. So we'll call this floor B4W, and it's going to be, this is just the default material, and all the material things are right there. So let's go up into fast preview, sorry. And there we have that. And then one thing we can do is, now that we have the floor, we can set one of these lights to cast a shadow. Let's do the left one. Let's only have one of them cast a shadow, because otherwise it'll get distracting. And then we can have the floor, we can go down to the object panel and have it receive shadows. Somewhere down here. And then this can cast shadows. So it's pretty, just barely see the shadow here. We can move the floor plane kind of over here a little bit so we get a better sense of shadow, and scale it up a bit. So you can keep doing this. It's really nice and quite quick. So there we go. Shadows. And I think those lights are a little hot, so we're going to turn them down a little bit. So the energy here is 1. Let's go to 0.6. And there you go. Okay, kind of a nice medium scene here. All right. So now what do we do? How do we get this, or the actual image wrapped on here? So that's for that you need a texture. It's like Blend. This is how you do it actually in Blender Internal. So you go to your textures panel here, and you actually go to materials textures, and you create a new one. And we want an image or movie, which is what the default is. And we can actually grab the image is already in here because we already imported it. So I'm going to call Gummy Monkeys, and there it appears. And the thing is, we're doing it on the diffuse, so it's set to diffuse, so it automatically kind of goes in there. And you hit fast preview, and it should work. Yes, it does. Oh, it's got the dyes. We don't want the dyes. The dye lines on there. So I think there's another one where it doesn't have the dye lines. No dyes. Thank you. Yeah, there we go. So there you kind of have it. Couple things I want to tweak here. Floor plane's kind of weird. And then this thing is, this is a little bit high. It kind of raises up a little bit. Now you can use your right button or your middle button to kind of move the camera a little bit. But otherwise, just rotating, what it does is actually the camera is what's called a target camera. It's pointing kind of right here at the center of the box. So in order to set what that center is, again, you can use your right mouse button, but let's set it initially. So actually what we do is let's go to the camera, use the same camera. And what it does is right now it's set at 0, 0, 0. So why don't we bring this up a little bit to, let's say, 1.5. because if we look at this, this is, how tall is this? So it's about 3, yeah, so 1.5 is about halfway up there. So it's going to now point at 1.5 instead of 0. So let's do the fast preview. And there you go. So yes, now it's right front and center. And, oh, sorry, I'm using the, I have these things called hand gestures, these gestures in Chrome, so I can use my right mouse button to do that. That's why it's going so quickly. So yeah, so now we have a texture on there and a shadow. So that's kind of how you do it. And what you can do is then export an HTML file from there. So I'm going to save this. Remember, you don't have to save to do this fast preview. And I'm going to go ahead and export an HTML file. Actually, first of all, let me get rid of this. We can just we can move it down to, we can not export it. And we can move it down to other layers to get it out of the way for now. And fast preview just to check. And then I'm going to go to File, Export, Blend4Web HTML. And I'm going to use the tutorial. So we're going to do tutorial Blend4Web 1.html. So we can export the HTML here. And I'm going to hide Blender. And so this is the original one, the example I showed you, but the new one is here under tutorial. It was under rehearsal, and it's just boop. So there you go. Basically the same kind of thing. In fact, I actually kind of like this lighting better. So that's literally it to get a simple HTML exported. Now, there's some not ideal things about this, and we'll go over this. First of all, the HTML file itself it looks to be 6.8 megabytes. So it's not tiny. Literally, the entire images and geometry and everything is packed in this one HTML file. And you get this little doohickey here, and you get a gray background. Although I guess you can set, I think you can set the background in world, but it defaults to gray. But you also get this doohickey here, and let me show you the HTML file here. Let me open my text editor here, and we're going to go ahead and open this HTML file, and I can show you what it looks like. I don't know if you guys are familiar with HTML. You may or may not be, but this is as you can see, it's the entire geometry and everything just kind of thrown in there with images and just stuff. It's all in one big HTML file, and it's just kind of a mess to read. And honestly, my software is having a little trouble handling it. And you could edit it if you want, I guess, but it's not really amenable to that. So I'm going to show you another way to do that. But that's a nice way to at least get a basic thing. And 6.8 megs is not the end of the world. So let's go back to Blender and take a look at let's take a look at some other things. So first of all, this is actually, I think, a little bit buggy, but we actually noticed, you remember I put a bevel modifier on here. And if we go to fast preview, we see that the bevel is actually applied. But that's not consistent. That's not always the case. So to make sure that it does get applied, you have to make sure your modifiers get applied. Like this happens a lot with Subsurf that doesn't get applied, is you have to go to apply modifiers. So make sure that's checked under the object panel. And then there's a couple other options too. So do make sure, if you have modifiers on there, and if you're doing any animation, you have to apply the modifiers first. And so you may want to save like another file if you're doing animation or if you're doing other things. So that's worth keeping in mind. Another thing I want to go over is node materials. So you noticed here, I just created this material here, and I'll go into a little detail about the material. This is the diffuse, and this is the specular. This is that little white highlight, and you can make it hard and you can make it soft. You can change the intensity. Actually, these should probably be tied together, because if you have something that's very soft, it should be pretty low intensity, and if you have something very hard, it should be relatively high intensity. It's just kind of the way physics works. But it lets you kind of figure out how soft you want, how glossy you want the material to look. But and you notice the texture here is just kind of added in. But if you want to do it with nodes, it's pretty easy to do. So I'm going to show you how to do a node material here on Blend4Web, because I find node materials extremely useful, if a little bit complicated. So you take this material and you just hit this little button here, which is use shader nodes. So you hit that, and boom, the nodes are already applied. Now you notice it all went black because the node is black. It uses a material node and then it goes to an output. And so the material there's no material loaded right now. So, but we can load one. We can actually load the very same material. So we're going to do box Blend4Web. So that basically just creates the same material in the same place we had it before, which is nice, but we didn't really need to use nodes for that. So, but what we can do is we can start putting stuff in here. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the textures here, and I'm going to take the color off the texture, so we just have so the texture is not affecting anything. And we can go there, and you see now we have no texture there anymore, which you probably saw right here. But what we can do is we can add that texture here in nodes. So we go to input, texture. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm hitting Shift A to bring that up, just like cycles. I don't have my keys here anymore just because it was a pain in the ass, like the program I was using being a pain in the ass. So we're gonna select that texture, which is just called texture. We can rename it, and then I'm just gonna plug that in here. But before I do that, I actually you have to set which how the UV is wrapping it. In cycles you can do this, but you don't have to. But in Blend4Web and I assume Blender internal, you have to be very explicit about it. So I'm going to go to, so you have to input, and I believe it is object info. Nope, it's not object info. It is geometry. Yeah, and so you just take geometry, put UV in there, and then it wraps the texture on. And again, it's still like the same damn thing we've been doing before. But the reason that node materials are useful is, well, you can use any nodes you have there like you did in cycles. Like, for example, like let's bring a color hue saturation node, and let's move the hue to 0. So it's going to change, you can see it's going to change the color of the reds. So, or well, the whole thing, it's going to change the entire color. This is not particularly useful, but there you go. You can make adjustments that way. You can do stuff like combining different images. You can do just a bunch of crazy stuff. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and show you one of the things I use for mockup3d.com, and this is a very crazy looking texture that I have, combining a bunch of images and doing just all sorts of crazy stuff, involving shininess and metallicness, and so that's why the nodes are useful here, though. So that's why they're useful. A couple gotchas. The value is on, which is basically the alpha channel is on top instead of on the bottom. So that's kind of annoying. But we're gonna plug that right back in here. Actually, we're gonna do something kind of fun. I'm gonna bring this floor back. Gonna make it export again. So we're gonna export that floor again. And so we have that shadow. But I'm going to do something interesting with the shadow here. I'm going to create... So we're going to bring that back to floor. And that should be the same thing. But I'm actually going to create it so it's a transparent shadow. So I'll show you how to do that. So first of all, you have to set the thing to be transparent. So I have to show transparency. And I'm going to go to alpha sort, which is the way to do that. And then I'm going to go here into nodes, and I'm going to set the color as the alpha. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the alpha channel here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to color invert, and then the color is just going to be black, but we're going to use, because otherwise it's going to bring a lot of stuff in there, but we're going to see it's partially transparent, but we're going to add a gradient here. So what I'm going to do is a converter. I'm going to have a color ramp here. Okay, so I'm going to knock that back a bit. So everything that's white is super, super clear. And then everything that's black is going to be black. And so what it's taking is doing just black, and then this is the alpha channel. So I'm going to do that again. And you don't see anything because I went too far. So I'm going to bring that back just a little bit and try again. Yeah, so there you have it. So this is actually an alpha channel, or it's a alpha shadow. So that's kind of nice. So now finally, the one thing I want to do is I want to make the background white. So we can do that by going into world, and we can go into the world is now a gray sky. So you set the sky here, and right now it's actually using cycles, so I don't want it to do that. I'm going to do paper sky, and I'm going to set it to white, and then I can hit fast preview. And there we go, it's set to white. Now it's reflecting white, so it's a little intense. So I'm going to turn down those lamps again. Let's go back down to, that's better. Yeah, now you got a nice, really hard shadow there. And then to adjust the camera, you can just hit 0 on the numpad, and the cameras basically work the same way. You can do control, or you hit GXX, GYY. I can zoom in a little bit, GZZ or dolly in. One thing I wanted to mention while we were here is that you can see that fast preview goes into this kind of analysis thing, and you can look at animation and all this other stuff, but it also brings up the interesting point that Blend4Web actually creates a web server. So I'm at localhost 6667 on my local machine, and there's a web server running. You can stop it if you want for some reason. And so the reason Blend4Web does that is so that you can preview this website, but it runs it within the folder you download. So it's actually important that if you want to be doing this kind of development, to do everything within that folder, and that's why I said the folder was kind of important. And this is actually the preview file, which I've altered a little bit to make my own, but if you just get rid of everything and just go to the home page, you will see that they have right locally on your machine all sorts of stuff things like the user manual and the API reference and some tutorials. So going back to Blender, let me do one more preview. Actually zoomed out a little bit and kind of tweaked it a bit, and I like what I see. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to export an HTML file. And I'm going to call this tutorial_B4W, just like that. And I'm going to hide Blender, and I'm going to bring up a blank window, and I'm going to take this here and drag it on there. And there you have it. So this is a regular HTML file. I'm actually going to go ahead and post it online. I will put a link down in the description so you can see what this looks like. Should actually work on your phone, and it should certainly work online. So take a look, and hope you guys found this tutorial informative. There is a lot more to Blend4Web. It can be very complicated. I built a whole app around it. And it's actually a game engine, so there's physics, there's animation, there's characters, there's armatures. You can use a lot of stuff, and it's right out of Blender, so it's quite nice. Yeah, so leave comments, say hi, whatever, if you have questions. And if you haven't already, check out mockup3d.com. More on that in the near future. But until then, thank you very much, and good luck with Blender. Have a good one. Bye-bye.